American History X is a provocative and brutal drama released in 1998, written by David McKenna and directed by Tony Kaye. It stars Edward Norton and Edward Furlong as Derek and Danny Vineyard, two brothers both ensnared by a white supremacist group. Derek, the face of the skinhead gang, kills two black men in cold blood. Then while in prison, he completely turns around and realizes how much damage he's done. He gets released after 3 years and tries to save his younger brother from going down the same road. It was Tony Kaye's first and last feature film. Some of the biggest reasons that American History X worked so well was the writing and the focus on the relationships between the characters, Edward Norton's commitment to the project, and the cinematography and aesthetic choices made by Tony Kaye. The screenwriter David McKenna was born and raised in San Diego, California in 1968. He grew up surrounded by the booming SoCal punk scene, and he based American History X on his own experiences witnessing racism and violence from the scene. He based quite a few of the sequences on actual incidents, and he spent a long time interviewing neo-Nazis for research. He said, "I had seen documentaries that just didn't ring true to me, and I wanted to write an accurate portrayal of how good kids from good families can get so terribly lost." And he definitely succeeded in that regard. I think one of David McKenna's biggest strengths when it comes to his work on American History X was how collaborative he was with the actors on the script. There's a scene in the movie where the skinhead gang loots a grocery store, which was directly inspired by an actual event of skinheads looting a grocery store that happened recently. And while David McKenna was rewriting the script to include this scene, he and Edward Norton collaborated on his speech that he gives to the gang before they go in.
Don't laugh! There's nothing funny going on here. This is about your life and mine. It's about decent, hard-working Americans falling through the cracks and getting the shaft because their government cares more about the constitutional rights of a bunch of people who aren't even citizens of this country.
And while American History X is extreme in nature, it is always grounded. I'm typically not a fan of having a character whose purpose in the story is to be this disembodied narrator. It's super overdone, it's usually really lazy writing too. But American History X is one of those exceptions. In my book, I don't mind the disembodied narration. Danny narrates for a lot of the movie, but it's not just him walking us through the plot. It's framed as an essay that he's writing for a class. And over the course of the movie, through his narration, we can see his relationship with his brother unfolding and also his character develop as he unlearns his white supremacist views. While the film tackles the broad universal issue of how racism is learned, it never comes off as callous or impersonal because of the focus on a small cast of characters. By spending a large part of the film developing these relationships, especially between Derek and Danny, the drama feels much more raw and hits closer to home. The role of Derek Vineyard was initially offered to Joaquin Phoenix, who declined due to the subject matter of the film. Tony Kaye originally didn't think that Edward Norton would be able to play the part. But Norton was very enthusiastic about the part, and the producers loved his passion for it. To be fair, all of the acting in American History X is pretty solid, but Edward Norton is definitely the standout performance among them all. Edward Norton was tasked with the difficult job of humanizing a neo-Nazi and murderer. But he was able to pull it off, and I'd go as far to say it is possibly his best performance on screen. The reason I say that is American History X is kind of the perfect encapsulation of Edward Norton's range as an actor. In the first half, his presence on screen is absolutely terrifying. In just under 2 hours, you see him go from this heartless, insane brute to a completely changed, humbled guy. He did get nominated for Best Actor at the Oscars for his portrayal of Derek Vineyard, and he should have won. Aside from his Oscar-nominated performance, his passion for the project extended to consulting on the final cut of the film, which Tony Kaye wasn't too thrilled about. Kaye's original cut of American History X was only about an hour and 30 minutes long, but the studio insisted on recutting. Edward Norton came in to consult on the re-editing, and Tony Kaye butted heads with him a lot, so much so that he left the project and wanted his name removed from the credits altogether. Tony Kaye also ran a smear campaign against New Line Cinema, who produced the film, and Edward Norton. His departure from the project and his subsequent behavior led to him being viewed as unemployable for years, and also why there's just not a ton of information about the making of the movie, so that made my life a little harder. The final cut of the movie came in at about 2 hours long. I've never seen Tony Kaye's cut of the film because it's not publicly available, but from my understanding, test audiences responded a lot more to the final cut. While Tony Kaye's ego and stubbornness got the best of him in post, he still did immaculate work in American History X, especially with the cinematography. The film is set on the day that Derek gets released from prison, with frequent flashbacks to the 3 years prior. The flashbacks are all shot in black and white, and while that's a pretty standard film convention, Tony Kaye used it with a more specific purpose. One of his initial complaints about casting Edward Norton as Derek was his leaner build. Kaye wanted Derek to come off as more physically menacing and intimidating, especially during the flashbacks. While Edward Norton put on about 25 pounds for the role, Tony Kaye took it the extra mile and utilized high-contrast lighting and shooting in black and white for the flashbacks to exaggerate his frame. This is very effective, especially during the very beginning of the movie when Derek commits the murders. The camera work and the editing make the whole scene feel like it came out of a horror movie, and Edward Norton's intense performance only adds to Derek's monstrous image. American History X is a compelling examination of how people fall down the destructive pipeline to white supremacy. It is a devastating watch. I've heard it described as a movie that makes you cry, laugh, scream, shake, throw things at the screen, and cry some more. You hate Derek right off the bat so much you don't think it's possible to empathize with him by the end, but somehow you still do. I watched this movie for a sociology class that I took a few years back. I knew it was going to be good, but I didn't expect it to be insanely good, and I didn't think I would be laying on the ground, shaking and crying by the end of the movie, but it just does that to you. I adore the movie. I think it's basically perfect, but it is definitely not for everyone. So while I do recommend it, please do proceed with caution if you do decide to watch it. American History X is a movie that people love to cite as a movie that couldn't have been made today, but American History X couldn't have been made in 1998. It was incredibly controversial at the time that it came out, due to its graphic content. While American History X is particularly relevant to the late 90s, the film's messages and warnings are just as valuable as they were in 1998. American History X is just as much a movie about how becoming a white supremacist destroys the individual as it is about the tragedy of all the other lives that get ruined by succumbing to that hate.